The Yugo, The Rise and Fall of the Worst Car in History, by Jason Vuic. Narrated by Erik Synnestvedt. Copyright 2010 by Jason Vuic. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Farrar, Straus & Giroux, and was produced in the year 2010 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Introduction. Question. What do you call the passengers in a Yugo? Answer. Shock absorbers. The artist Kevin O'Callaghan builds really big things. Really big, really poppy, really visual things, like a giant pair of glasses for the singer Elton John, or TV and movie sets for A&E, ABC, and the kids' network Nickelodeon. O'Callaghan is a master of 3D illustration and teaches a course on the subject at the prestigious School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. Each year he sponsors several student shows. For one, entitled The Next Best Ding, O'Callaghan gave each student a vintage typewriter and asked the class to reinterpret the machine in a different way. "I've always been interested in useless items and giving them other uses," said O'Callaghan, whose students turned 50 decrepit typewriters into beautiful works of art. They were functional, too. There was a gumball machine, a meat slicer, a Kleenex dispenser, an aquarium, a blender, a shoe shine kit, a snow globe, a payphone, even a Corona-matic waffle iron that made keyboard-shaped waffles. O'Callaghan's other student shows have included chairs, beds, clocks, carousels, chessboards, and versions of the famed Moon Man from MTV. But O'Callaghan's most popular show, bar none, was on the Yugo, the failed car from Yugoslavia. "I was driving around one day and saw some kids playing stickball," he said, "and they were using a Yugo as the backstop." O'Callaghan stopped and asked them about it. "Does your father know you're doing this?" And the kids said, "Yeah, it's a piece of junk." As O'Callaghan drove away, he had an idea. His next show, scheduled for the main foyer of New York's Grand Central Terminal, would involve the Yugo. "The Yugo was like the little engine that couldn't," said O'Callaghan. "It was the worst designed product of all time. So, in holding a show, we wanted to give the Yugo a new life other than the one it was designed for. But for that, O'Callaghan needed Yugos, dozens and dozens of Yugos. He placed an ad in several New York newspapers under the caption, 'Yugos Wanted, Dead or Alive.' He received 79 calls in 3 days and bought 39 relatively undented Yugos for $92 apiece. Then his students went to work. They transformed the automobiles into truly eye-popping displays that one magazine called witty, playful, and brilliant, impeccably crafted and technically amazing. Like the Yugo Easter Island Head, the Yugo Zippo, and the Yugo Baby Grand. There was also a Yugo accordion, a Yugo subway car, photo booth, toaster, telephone, diner, shower, movie theater, and a cozy Yugo fireplace, complete with a deer head. There was a Yugo barbecue, a Yugo confessional, and a Yugo porta-potty with the license plate "Got to Go." The crowds loved it. In May 1995, literally thousands of people took in the exhibit, which then traveled to more than 20 cities, including Montreal. It was featured on NPR, CNN, NBC, CBS, and in newspaper and TV reports from as far away as Croatia. The National Enquirer even covered it. "We've gotten a better reception than we ever expected," said Celia Landegger, the creator of the Yugo Baby Grand. "We're all just blown away. Every day we're amazed at how many people have heard of it." "Squeezing lemons to make art," read a Washington Post headline. "Sad little cars given new life as sculpture," said the Dallas Morning News. In all, several dozen newspapers and magazines reviewed the exhibit, giving it high praise for its creativity, sense of humor, and optimism. The reviews also agreed that the Yugo, the tiny, unassuming $3,990 import, was a hopelessly degenerate hunk of trash. For just a sampling, the Yugo is to cars what Milli Vanilli is to rock and roll. Chicago Tribune. It was the auto industry's greatest fumble. St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The scourge of interstates everywhere. Los Angeles Daily News. The Rodney Dangerfield of cars. People. As the Buffalo News put it, nobody has sympathy for the Yugo. Only bad dreams. Junkyards won't take them. Dogs never chase them. No Yugo was reported stolen, because no owner wanted it back. And when Kevin O'Callahan picked up one for his art exhibit, he got it for nothing plus a spaghetti dinner. But was the Yugo that bad? Can any car, even a bad car, be a hopelessly degenerate hunk of trash? Why was the Yugo so reviled? Even today, a simple Google search of the terms Yugo and worst car receives more than 20,000 hits. In 2000, listeners of the popular national public radio program Car Talk voted the Yugo the worst car of the millennium. According to Yahoo Answers, it is the worst car ever sold in the U.S. Ditto at ratedall.com, bestandworst.com, and automotoportal.com. In 2008, readers of the AAA magazine Via ranked the Yugo the worst car ever, and a 2007 Hagerty Insurance poll declared the Yugo the second ugliest car in history. It was second in Richard Porter's book Crap Cars, and was named by Time.com and Forbes.com as one of the worst cars of all time. The Yugo appears in Erik Peters's book Automotive Atrocities, in Craig Cheatham's book The World's Worst Cars, and in Giles Chapman's book The Worst Cars Ever Sold. The Yugo even has an entry in the online Urban Dictionary, collector of such useful terms as dope, snap, and dog, that reads simply, the world's worst car. Comedians use the Yugo for their jokes. President Bush again denied that the U.S. is in a recession, quipped Jay Leno. I don't know if people believed him. After his speech, he returned to the airport in a presidential limo named Yugo 1. Singers sing songs about it. There's My Bloody Yugo by the legendary Jim Ruiz Group, a slick bossa nova ditty. There's I Drive a Yugo by the left-wing fascists, a kind of alt-punk number. There's I'll Stay Yugo by the Belgian electronica group Owl Music. And then there's Paul Shanklin's satirical ballad In a Yugo. Writers parody the car in books such as Florida Roadkill by Tim Dorsey, in television shows such as Moonlighting, The Simpsons, and Saturday Night Live, and in movies such as Dragnet, Bowfinger, Drowning Mona, Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, and Die Hard 3. Advertisers spoof the Yugo in commercials for Yahoo and Midas. Kids destroy the Yugo in games such as Grand Theft Auto 4 and Carmageddon 2, Carpocalypse Now. And university professors study the car's importer, Yugo America Incorporated, in order to show students how not to run a business. In short, the Yugo is an icon. People made fun of the Edsel, wrote one author, Ford's $400 million mistake. But at least the Edsel worked. The dreadful Yugo, on the other hand, was both hard to view on a full stomach and an out-and-out vile little car that stretched the most generous usage of the terms shoddy and slapped together. The car was less reliable than a Halliburton financial disclosure, and will likely hold in perpetual ignominy the title of Worst Car Ever Sold to the American Public. Strong words. But what do we know about the Yugo? Who imported it? Who made it? And why? One would think that such an iconic automobile would have a story behind it, a tale. But what most Americans know are the jokes. How do you make a Yugo go faster? Use a tow truck. How do you double the value of your Yugo? Fill the gas tank. What's included in every Yugo owner's manual? A bus schedule. But what Americans don't know, for instance, is that it was the fastest-selling first-year European import in U.S. history, or that when the Yugo went on sale in America, there were lines at some dealerships 10 deep, or that Yugo dealers once sold 1,050 cars in a single day, or that Chrysler once offered to buy the company, or that its CEO, Malcolm Bricklin, was the first person to bring Subaru to the United States. What Americans do know is that the Yugo was bad, really bad, but relatively few people have ever seen one. The company sold, at most, 150,000 cars between 1985 and 1992. Since then, their numbers have dwindled to perhaps 1,000 working Yugos. And that's generous. As of 1999, there were more than 17 million registered vehicles in Florida, but just one registered Yugo. So was the Yugo that bad? Yes, by almost any measure. It was cheap, poorly built, somewhat unsafe in a crash, prone to breakdowns, and dirty emissions-wise. And for such a small automobile, its gas mileage was poor. In 1986, Consumer Reports wrote that it was better to buy a good used car than a new Yugo. That same year, the Yugo ranked 33 out of 33 in a J.D. Power & Associates Consumer Satisfaction Survey, and in a series of 5-mile-per-hour crash tests conducted by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, IIHS, it sustained a whopping $2,197 in damage, more than 23 other cars. In 1987, it topped both the Massachusetts and New York State Lemon Indexes. And in 1988, in the midst of a Motor Trend magazine road test, the Yugo GVX broke down. The Yugo was also last in a North Carolina emissions test, and last in a car book survey of resale values. And in a report published by the IIHS, the Yugo had the 8th highest death rate of any 1984 to 88 model year automobile on the highway between 1985 and 1989. So, yes, the Yugo was bad. But was it the worst car in history? No. Any ranking is subjective, but as a rule, if an automobile passes U.S. safety and emissions tests, it is a relatively decent car. Not necessarily a good car or a reliable car, but one that has met certain basic pre-sale standards that are among the toughest in the world. Said one Peugeot executive, whose company left America in 1991, there were considerable changes we had to comply with. Emission systems, injection equipment, and onboard diagnostics are all different on U.S. vehicles, and they must be reinforced for crash requirements and fuel system integrity. It simply has to be done. One Mercedes manager estimated that the company sold 15% of its cars in the U.S., but had 50% of its engineers working on U.S. emissions problems. The standards were that tight. Thus, there is a reason why Russian Ladas and Samaras aren't sold here, or why Indian Tatas, or Malaysian Protons, or Chinese Dongfengs haven't captured the American market. Though in the case of Chinese cars, this may indeed happen. For my vote, the worst car ever sold in America was the Subaru 360, a car so light it was exempt from federal safety regulations and considered a covered motorcycle. It had forward-opening suicide doors, burned a quart of outboard motor oil every 260 miles, and had front and rear bumpers that were several inches lower than those of any car on the road. Consumer Reports rated it not acceptable. Then there was the super mini BMW Isetta, which in the 1950s was banned from California's freeway system for being too small and too slow, and the three-wheeled Messerschmitt, yes, of German Luftwaffe fame, which sat 2 passengers in tandem, had a handlebar instead of a steering wheel, no reverse gear, and started with a pull cord. You may have seen it in the film The Addams Family, where it was driven, fittingly enough, by Cousin It. So no, the Yugo wasn't the worst car in history, not by a long shot. What the Yugo was a dated automobile, even in 1985. The car was based on the Fiat 127 and the Fiat 128, both utilitarian subcompacts conceived in the 1960s. Thus, the Yugo was incredibly Spartan. The original GV model came only with a stick shift. It had no radio, no air conditioning, no airbags, and no tachometer. Its windows were hand-cranked, of course, and it lacked even a glove compartment. To understand the Yugo, you've got to look at it strictly in terms of fundamental transportation, wrote Car and Driver. It is a cheap, no-frills appliance. The Yugo was cheap. At $3,990, it was the least expensive new car in America. With dealer financing, a new Yugo cost just $99 a month. It was pitched as a generic people's car, a new Volkswagen. In the words of the man principally behind its introduction to America, Malcolm Bricklin, a 19-cent hamburger with meat. In the fall of 1985, people flocked to buy it. Hundreds bought Yugos sight unseen. Though a dull little car built in communist Yugoslavia, the Yugo was a hit. No, a mania, that the Associated Press called a Yugomania. It didn't last. Critics panned the car for its poor quality. Sales dipped. Bricklin sold the company, and Yugo America went bankrupt in 1992. That should have been it. But by then, the Yugo was firmly ensconced as the worst car in history, a car that Americans love to hate. It's true. We hate the Yugo. The Brits hate it too. In 1996, British TV journalist Jeremy Clarkson called the Yugo a hateful, hateful car, and destroyed one sorry example with a shell from a Chieftain tank. The question is, why? Why are bad cars pop icons? And why is the Yugo the greatest bad car pop icon of all time? The answer is in this book. The Yugo story is in this book. It is the sad, sometimes funny, and altogether fascinating tale of how entrepreneur Malcolm Bricklin brought the Yugo to the United States. It is a short history of the worst car in history. Chapter 1. Yugo Girls. Question: how do you double the value of your Yugo? Answer: fill the gas tank. The original idea to sell the Yugo in America came from California entrepreneur Miroslav Kiefert, who in March 1984 imported 3 Yugo 45s for display at the Los Angeles Auto Expo. Slight of build, yet long in personality, Kiefert was a character. He had come to Los Angeles in 1969 from Prague, Czechoslovakia, where he and his father sold used cars. The Kieferts specialized in one model, the Fiat 600, which they sold in one color, red. It wasn't that Czech car buyers were demanding red Fiat 600s, remembers Kiefert. It was because private car dealing was illegal. Technically, Czech citizens could sell their cars only after their odometers had reached 5,000 kilometers. But buying and selling used cars in quantity, as a business, was against the law. Thus, there were no used car lots in communist Czechoslovakia. Buyers simply found their cars through word of mouth, or ordered new cars directly from Czechoslovakia's 2 main auto producers, Škoda and Tatra. However, like all Soviet bloc countries, Czechoslovakia had government waiting lists for new cars. To buy a Tatra 613, for instance, car buyers paid full price in advance, then waited 6 months to a year for delivery. The buyer had no say over the car's color or interior, and received no warranty of any kind. That was one of the flaws of a communist country, states Kiefert. Somebody in the government would make a decision of how much of anything could be exported, imported, manufactured, or sold. It was the same thing with cars. The government didn't make enough new cars, so a black market developed for used ones. But since it was illegal for people to deal in used cars as a business, my father had to be careful. That's why he bought the same make and model, the Fiat 600, over and over, then drove the cars for 5,000 kilometers before selling them at a profit. nobody could tell these were all different cars. It was a good business. Kiefert's father was a tour guide by profession, which meant he could acquire new Fiat 600s during business trips to northern Italy. He would buy a car, drive it back to Czechoslovakia, then bribe a guard at the border. Bribes always worked in those days, remembers Kiefert. You could bribe anyone for anything. His father bought 3 or 4 Fiats per year, and each family member had a Fiat registered to them. The goal was to put 5,000 kilometers on each car, a daunting task for the Kieferts, considering the poor roads and lack of interstates in Czechoslovakia. In 1967, for instance, the Central Intelligence Agency estimated that Czechoslovakia had 46,000 kilometers of roads, of which only 10,000 kilometers were paved. By contrast, the United States had over 3 million kilometers of roads, of which 1 million were paved. That was when Kiefert's father had an idea. He and his son would race their Fiats in local road rallies to burn the 5,000 kilometers. Kiefert began racing at age 14. At 16, he placed in one of Czechoslovakia's main road rallies and was well on his way to becoming a professional driver. But in 1969, Kiefert decided to leave Czechoslovakia to live with an uncle in the United States. Through various family connections, he secured an exit visa and began working at his uncle's restaurant in West Hollywood, California. Kiefert arrived in the United States in 1969, the same year as Woodstock, the launching of Apollo 10, and the first troop withdrawals from Vietnam. As a student at Hollywood High, he found most of his friends owned muscle cars, Pontiac Firebirds and Plymouth Barracudas. They were a far cry from Kiefert's Fiat 600. One day, while walking along Santa Monica Boulevard, Kiefert passed a Honda motorcycle dealership, which had just displayed the company's first ever imported automobile in its showroom window, a tiny 2-door sedan known as the 600. By almost any measure, the Honda 600 was a midget. At a length of 125 inches, the 600 was nearly 3 feet shorter than the Volkswagen Beetle. At 1,355 pounds, it also weighed 500 pounds less than the Beetle. In addition, the Honda 600 had a 4-speed manual transmission, a unibody steel construction, and reached a top speed of 80 miles per hour. The price? $1,275. Kiefert was in love. Compared to the Fiat 600, he states, the Honda 600 was a rocket. Like many small car enthusiasts, Kiefert favored the 600's handling to that of larger and more powerful muscle cars. He eventually bought other 600s and opened a business fixing the cars for Hollywood area owners. Though Honda stopped selling the 600 in 1972, in the early 1980s, Kiefert discovered that people were willing to spend thousands of dollars to restore their tiny 600s. The car had a real following, so much so that Kiefert developed a profitable Honda 600 business, and was known locally as a small car guru. He drove and tested not only Hondas, but any other small car he could find. In 1982, Kiefert read that socialist Yugoslavia was producing a new 3-door hatchback based on the Fiat 127 and with a 903cc 45-horsepower engine. Known as the Yugo 45, the car was cheap, by American standards, and in Kiefert's words, an import opportunity just waiting to happen. The Yugoslavs planned to export the car to Great Britain in mid-1983, but had no such plans for the United States. Therefore, in the summer of 1982, Kiefert hopped into his Honda 600 and drove to the Yugoslav consulate in San Francisco. At the time, socialist Yugoslavia had consulates in California, Illinois, New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, as well as a sprawling embassy complex in Washington, D.C. In San Francisco, Kiefert met with an official commercial attaché, who assisted him in contacting the Yugoslav auto manufacturer Crvena Zastava, the maker of the Yugo 45. Located 90 minutes south of Belgrade, in Kragujevac, Serbia, Crvena Zastava had been established in 1953 in a failing armaments plant in the city center. The name Crvena Zastava means red flag in Serbo-Croatian, as in the red flag of communism. In later years, the Yugo 45 would send up a different red flag among Western consumers. According to economic historian Michael Pallaret, the car was badly built, like all Zastava's cars, and bottlenecks of every kind limited output. Although in 1962 Zastava teamed with Italian car manufacturer Fiat to build a new $30 million factory on the outskirts of Kragujevac, by the 1980s its facilities were outdated. According to one observer, by U.S., Japanese, and Western European standards, the Zastava works are a throwback to the Dark Ages, a Diego Rivera mural choreographed live. Noisy, smoky, and in many places poorly lit, the facilities teem with workers. OSHA, the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, would have a field day here. Zastava was at least 10 to 15 years behind American automobile manufacturers in technology and efficiency, and many tasks were still being done by hand. Kiefert had never been to Kragujevac. He also had no experience with Zastava's low-quality motor cars. But he knew that the Yugo 45 was essentially a Fiat, a car sold in the United States in one form or another since 1957. Even though in 1983 Fiat had announced that because of poor sales it was leaving the American market, Kiefert believed that he could keep Fiat in the United States by importing the Yugo. For that, however, he needed a license, so with the help of the Yugoslav commercial attaché in San Francisco, in July 1982, Kiefert sent a telex to Yugoslavia's state-run export company Genex. Short for General Export, Genex was Socialist Yugoslavia's main trading house, whose job it was to sell consumer goods and other commodities for over 1,200 domestic firms. In 1982, Genex did $4 billion in business. The company had offices in some 70 countries, and in 1986 introduced McDonald's to Yugoslavia. Genex put Kiefert in touch with Zastava, but officials there were skeptical that consumers in the United States would buy Yugos. Remembers Kiefert, "They told me that Americans wanted V8s, that Americans wanted air conditioning and automatics, and that Zastava just didn't make them." Nevertheless, Kiefert was determined. He pestered Zastava until late 1983, when the company awarded him Yugo 45 distribution rights for the state of California. There were no contracts, no negotiations, and no paperwork. In fact, Kiefert's Yugo license, if it could be called a license, was a one-page telex. It stated that beginning with the 1985 model year, Zastava would provide Kiefert with 5,000 cars annually. The telex said nothing of price. What is more, Zastava offered no guarantees and demanded that Kiefert pay for each car up front. License in hand, in November 1983, Kiefert ordered 3 Yugo 45s from Kragujevac. They cost a grand total of $7,200 and were shipped to Los Angeles in a 40-foot container that arrived in March 1984. Kiefert was beside himself. He'd spent less than 10 grand and was now owner, president, and CEO of Yugo Cars Incorporated, the official distributor of Yugo 45 automobiles from Yugoslavia. Kiefert knew it was a long shot, that most Americans wanted V8s and air conditioning and automatic transmissions. But timing was on his side. Just 2 months earlier, Yugoslavia had hosted the 14th Winter Olympiad in Sarajevo, and ABC had given the games over 63 hours of television coverage. There were Sarajevo placemats at McDonald's, Sarajevo postage stamps from the U.S. Postal Service, even a thermos and bowl set from Campbell's, the official soups of the 1984 Winter Olympics. Night after night, reporters praised Yugoslavia for its efficiency. The Yugoslavs have done everything capitalists say socialists can't do, exclaimed one. Buses run frequently and on time. Messages are delivered quickly, and arriving American journalists are whisked to their village, assigned porters, and shown to their rooms. Skeptics said Yugoslavia couldn't handle a modern games. Well, wherever Marshal Tito is these days, He must be smiling. What the Yugoslav...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?